We're happy to have you back after lunch, and hopefully the lunch met your expectations. And the good news is, if you wonder where's dessert, it'll be coming on the next break. There'll be cookies, so we haven't forgot about the need for sugar to keep the brain and the body going. And the next topic, as we were talking, I'm not sure how many questions you'll have, because a lot of people, what is AI and what does it mean? And in some ways, it's a bit of a Wild West show, because it isn't like there's federal law on AI. We don't have a whole body of Supreme Court and local court decisions on it, because nobody knows yet what the big issues are, but it's something that's important, and we're privileged to have our next speaker, in terms of her experience as managing partner of the Columbus office of the Taft Law Firm, and she's been very experienced in labor and employment law, and especially with schools and representing different employers. And the AI issue, when I talked to her a while back, and she happened to just casually mention it, and then I kind of almost blew it off like, that sounds too techie. But then she gave me a couple examples, because one of the key questions is AI can do marvelous things, but somebody's got to program AI and set the parameters, and that's when you start getting into problems, such as one example you gave me is if you're Microsoft and you program it to give a bias or an advantage to existing employees, does that discriminate against people who are outside? So that's just one little teaser tidbit. I'm the appetizer, now the main event. It's all yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Terry, and good afternoon. My name is Janica Pierce-Tucker, and I'm so glad to be here today. I think Terry mentioned I am not disturbed by people who have questions, so as we go through this, please answer them. I think there are microphones throughout that will make that happen. So as what Terry said is that, AI is becoming more and more and more popular. It's been around, right? All of us, how many of us shop for a pair of shoes, and then the next thing you know, we have like 10,000 ads about the same shoes. That's what that is. How many times you get on Netflix and now they know all the movies you like. That is AI. And so it has been impacting our lives for a while now. And what we are seeing is that it is now coming into our workplaces. And we're trying to, I think employers, organizations are really trying to figure out how to use it effectively and efficiently. Because why is it helpful? It's helpful because everybody's looking for employees, right? Everybody's trying to find the people to do the jobs that you need done, and there's just not enough bodies in your organizations to go out and find them. You can sit at career fairs, you can put out so many ads, and then what happens? You put out a job ad, and then you get thousands of applications back, and then someone's got to cipher through all of that. So one of the things that I want to do in this presentation is to calm some of the fears, right? But also just give you some education and background as to what it is, how it's being used, some of the safeguards that are starting to be put in place, specifically by federal agencies and the like, as it relates to AI. And always think of it as that. It's the technology behind the platform, is how I best describe it. So when we think about it in businesses, right, and we think about we're going to talk about the main one that a lot of folks have heard about, ChatGPT. How many people have that app on your, okay. And when you have time, you should get it. And it's quite fascinating to play with. It's quite fascinating as to how much information is in there, right? Remember when Wikipedia came out and everybody's like, oh my God, it has so much info. Well, this is nothing to compare. It is like anything and everything you could think of to ask. It will produce an answer. And for the most part, it's pretty accurate. I highly recommend you read it. We have a joke in our house with our kids. I married into 4 boys, and I'm like, this is not for your essays at college. I need you to write them. I need you to, but trust me, I know they're using it. I felt like as a parent I had to say that, but I feel like they're using it. So when you think about it, I think that, we're trying to come up with all of these different things in our businesses as, we come out of COVID, and what we see, the workplace looks different. There's all of this technology that we've had to adapt to just to do our jobs. And so this is one thing that I think has evolved in that space. And when I think about when we first heard about email, right, and how all of us freaked out, like, oh my goodness, we're going to get all these emails, and what are we going to do? And then when the internet, right, and remember in 2000 when all of us felt like a whole garage full of water because we didn't know what was going to happen when that switch happened? Well, this is kind of where we are again. And we will continue to be in these places during our lifetime because that is what's supposed to happen. Technology is supposed to get better. It's supposed to make our processes more efficient and better for us to use. So don't necessarily shy away from that. Will you hear conversations about, is AI going to eliminate jobs? Is it going to eliminate people? And you will hear me say more often than not during this presentation that while there will be some jobs that will be eliminated, there will also be jobs that will be further enhanced by AI, right? There will be a need for training. One example one of my partners used recently was talking about, when you have bookkeeping and accounting, remember the paper ledgers, and then there was the development of Excel, right? And so that bookkeeper didn't lose their job, they just needed to learn how to do Excel. And so it's kind of that same concept of how we use AI. The issue is it's moving fast. And so it's hard to kind of wrap your head around it in terms of what all it is doing. So let's talk about how do you use AI in recruiting? Well, you use it to try to find the talent that you're looking for. You can set up systems in place that will draw people to your organization, right? And then it will also cipher through those individuals what best tools they have that will meet the needs of your organization. That sounds amazing, right? But what's happening is that it's also ciphering out folks on maybe a bias. There may be a bias that's built into the software. I'll give you an example. So Amazon was using one that said, apply to Amazon. And if you've ever worked and what it was doing is the AI was taking out folks who worked for Amazon previously. And what was happening is AI was like, why is it the same people that keep popping up in terms of our applicants? They were concerned necessarily about the lack of diversity, in terms of generation, in terms of age. It just seemed like they kept getting the same group of people. What then they realized was, they were Xing out, it was putting in another bucket folks who had any kind of affiliation with Amazon before. And so you were losing out on folks who returned, or maybe folks who saw, this is a promotion. Individuals currently working for Amazon may have saw that's a job that is a promotion for me, I should apply. They were kicking those folks out because of the way in which the technology was set up. So it is important that while you use it as a recruiting tool, you have to be in touch with your vendors. You have to understand what they're using in order to get the data to you. Because as of right now, the EEOC is saying it is the employer's responsibility as it relates to how the AI is built. It is, so it doesn't fall on the vendor. So if you work with a vendor and you're getting these results and they may appear to be discriminatory on its face, whether it's, this testing then weeds out individuals with disabilities or doesn't offer accommodations, that's not on the vendor, that's on you. So it's very important that you have those conversations, kind of creating a checklist for the vendors in which you interact with so that you understand their processes, make sure you're comfortable with them. Do some sampling first, right? Don't just trust it and just put it out there so that you can kind of see what information you're going to get back, and is that the tools that you want to use. You can use it for testing. I think, and training. I mean, the idea is to, again, make your life more efficient, make it more user-friendly, but also thinking about how you then can minimize the extra work that is on some of your HR professionals as they're trying to acquire talent. As they then bring on board people, right? You can then use some of the AI technology that's built behind that to really tailor it to your organization that it streamlines your process. One of the things is that, they've been using it for facial recognition. Well, that gets tricky too because, with those kind of things, your technology needs to be on point that it's recognizing who it says it is, right? And so you have to be concerned about security. You have to be concerned about the individuals, especially if the testing is not being performed on site, like it's a remote testing procedure, then you need to make sure that the security measures are not being averted, right? Because there's always a workaround to what we do in this space. So I think that you have to know that. So one of the big things is that folks says, well, what is it? How do you get there? And it literally just leverages computers and machines to mimic problem solving and decision-making capabilities of the human mind. That's literally what it is. It is making it think that it is a human being and producing out all of this information. That's why it has all of this information when you put it out there and you ask it a question. And it feels like a human-like communication, right? So my daughter was laughing at me because she was doing something, and I was like, I swear to you, that's just like E.T. She was like, Mom, who is E.T.? I was like, let me tell you. Okay, and I was like, you could have a whole conversation with E.T. I was like, that's just your modern day chat GPT, just trust me. But that's exactly what it's intended to do. It is intended for you to have this human interaction that spits back information, right, about whatever topic you can imagine. And so now what we have is that, we're in a space that there's no regulations, right? There's no rules. And sometimes that's a good place to be, but sometimes it's kind of like a tricky place to be. Because, it's like, hey, if you're going to test something before the government starts to regulate it. Because once the regulations come into place, that's when you have to change the way you're doing things. It's going to happen. With ChatGPT, it's kind of been summoned to Congress to have a multitude of conversations. And it's because, and not to their fault, no one kind of told them that they couldn't do all these things that they're doing. And so now we're at this point where there has to be that. And to what Terry's point, there's no case law for us lawyers to tell our clients like, well, the law says you can't do that, because we don't have that. So we're just in this gray area, right? And we're always saying words like, well, it depends, or maybe you should try that, or think about it. And then it's always like, and what's the risk of you trying it to see if it works for your organization? And so what we have to do is, what we have now is the EEOC in 2021, they launched this initiative. And the initiative is designed specifically to make sure that we have the AI complies with federal and civil rights laws. Okay, so they kind of, and we'll talk about in the next slide, like the piece that they kind of carved out. But the point of the initiative is to make sure that the use of software that is being used, that it is not, whether it's learning, whether it's relating to any kind of emerging technologies, that it complies with our laws. And what they did was they carved out and said, what's the low-hanging fruit here? And they focused on the ADA. They focused on, as the first part, as individuals with disabilities, and how in which we have to make sure that the use of AI does not then also discriminate against individuals with disabilities. That's in the recruitment process, that is in the training process, in the testing, all aspects of it. And so we're going to work through some scenarios that you can, to kind of get your mind thinking about, I see how this could be an issue. So In 2022, the EEOC issued a technical assistance document, and it literally goes through all of these different scenarios of how in which using algorithms produce a certain result, and it's designed to kind of give you some practical tips, specifically on how this can turn into a situation. So, for example, let's say, for an instance, that you decide to have a person with a disability that you're not aware of. There's a video interviewing software, right? So there's a video that comes up and it asks certain questions. But the algorithm has been set up so that it's testing your speech patterns, right? And it's seeing how do you, when you're talking about a problem or working through a problem, somehow how in which you speak about it can also be a data point for how well you solve problems. Well, what if you get someone that has a speech impediment? So they're taking the necessary pauses to ensure that they can speak appropriately, answering the problem, but then the AI is saying, oh, maybe that person doesn't know what they're doing. Oh, the pauses cause us to believe that that lacks credibility in their thought process. Well, that's a problem for the EEOC because that's not the issue here. But then as an employer, you're not supposed to ask that, right? You're not supposed to talk about when you get those results back, how do you do a follow-up that doesn't put you on notice of a disability that you didn't know about before? And of course that's the person you're not going to hire, right? So then, for another reason, and so then you have a layer of, now I know a disability and I didn't hire this person, not because of the disability, but that claim is kind of lingering out there. And so again, you have to make sure that the technology that you choose is directly correlated to what you're trying to achieve. If it makes sense for you to have that, but then you have to have an outlet that allows an individual that presents with a disability that they know, that they're able to inform you, maybe through some anonymous, through the human resources department or a person to say, hey, I may need some accommodations for this test. I may need a proctor. And right now, if folks ask for any kind of accommodation, give it to them. Until we get some guidelines and tell us, because it's not worth the headache, of going through that process of not doing it, and then also not, offering an individual a job. And think about too, as you go through using these kind of things, is the bias that can come about in terms of just questions, right? And how it lines up into a simple question of, are you available during the hours of operation? Yes. Do you have a commute? No. And then it kind of then keeps building on all of these questions, where sometimes the end result could be weeding out individuals that have children. Or individuals
Question
that,
over there.
Got a question over here. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry to stop you mid-sentence.
Oh, no, please.
But you said, give them the accommodation. Does that need to be a disclosure that needs to be up front, that if you have any accommodations that may be needed, please ask? Should there be a disclosure before allowing that testing to proceed? Yeah,
very good question. So I think that, for example, if you can, I think it would be helpful if you can provide a little snippet, right, or an explanation of, in order to apply for this job, you will be subject to testing, and the testing will consist of blah, 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 right? And then say, please let us know, if an accommodation is required or needed based upon that description. So that way you don't have everybody and their mother raising their hand just because they see a test. So an explanation, just a brief description of how in which an individual will be tested is important. And also, make sure you know the why. You don't have to put that in the information, but just make sure you know the why as to why you're using it for whatever platform it is. And then I also would caution you to say that a lot of times as you get into this process, you feel like I'm getting overloaded with information that I don't otherwise need. Figure out a way how you're going to store that information. Yes, I know HR is like one more record to keep. But I will tell you, until we figure out what's going on, don't throw away anything. Let's find out a way to just, even if it's just a file that says, applicants, right? So again, you have the data until we have some guidelines on how long we're supposed to keep this data. Treat it as any other applications and other related materials that you get. If it's training, whatever rules apply to personnel files and things like that, keep that information securely stored. And also make sure that you have a process in place that is not getting deleted. So when we think about how it screens out applicants, that is exactly what the EEOC is concerned about. They're concerned about the beginning phases of employment, and just by having a test or just by having something that is done to, in our minds, we're just trying to get people, right? We're just trying to get people, and we're trying to get through them as fast as possible. The EEOC says, look, I'm going to give you all these scenarios of how this can turn out bad. So for example, let's talk about how many of you ask on your applications, give us your employment history. Most people ask that, right? And how many of us see like a gap in employment and be like, what was going on, right? You just was chilling for 2 years? Like, what was happening? But I feel like a lot of people were chilling for 2 years. And so then what happens is that you maybe not get that person, right? You maybe say, well, too long of a gap in history, or you got to ask a follow-up question. And so but sometimes your software can screen those people out. Because your algorithm may program it to say, if there is a gap in employment history for more than X number of months, move on to the next. Well, what happens if that person was undergoing some treatment, was dealing with a situation? Then that was a reason why they probably should not have been screened out of the process. Again, remember that your reason for doing it is reasonable. It makes sense. It's objective, but the results are producing a potentially discriminatory result, and so that's what you have to be mindful of. And I know it feels like sometimes you're just like walking through a landmine with some of this. And I know they're going to talk about disparate impact next, but I also, one of the things is that one of the ways to reduce some of that information or to minimize that is think about, what information do I have to know? Really take some time to think about that. And we went through some of this process when it was the whole check the box and the looking at your applications and really thinking about, do I need to know how much about an information do I need to know, right? And so that's where we came up with this optional of, you can tell us about your demographics, but we don't need to know that. So think about what it is that you really need to know, and then kind of have your mind go a little far out, just a little bit, and try to think of different scenarios of how that could have a disparate impact, how it could be treated or result in discrimination. And I think that will allow you to get further ahead in the process of working with your vendors to make sure you build the proper algorithm for what you're trying to do. Another thing that someone talked about was, how testing, there's a significant amount of research about test anxiety. And we definitely see that more as we have the younger generations come into the workplace, right? There is a significant issue where and sometimes it can also, the way your test can set up, it can trigger someone who has PTSD or any other of those stress disorders. And so what happens is that, when you have you have a screen in front of you and then forcing an individual just to answer these questions in itself can cause a problem. So again, think about, well, is there a way then for us to ask these questions that are not based on the screen, but also gets the same results? Is there a way to provide a paper version? Is there a way to have a conversation where where those individuals' questions are recorded verbally, because again, it's a minefield out there. And for folks who are very familiar with the ADA, how many times have we heard, like, at this point, everything is a disability. So I always tell clients, like, don't waste your time trying to figure out, is it a disability? Yeah, it is. Somebody somewhere said it, and you know it, and just start with, okay, how can I help you? Because I don't even know what you're talking about, but I'm assuming, yes, it's a disability, right? And so, and so therefore you just, when you start there, then think about all of the things that come into when you're using AI, right? Because you're like, what? That's because it causes you stress to read more than 5 sentences. Okay, that's a thing. But you know, it can happen. And you have to like then be prepared as an employer to really try to deal with that. And so what the EEOC is trying to get employers to do is to sign up and be part of these promising practices, right? And I have a friend that works for the EEOC, and her and I always laugh, because I was like, you guys always try to set us up. You try to have employers sign this pledge, and then the next thing you know, the pledge is like Exhibit A, right? And I'm like, what is this promising practices thing? And so, but it's the idea, it's like I will vow to, right? Try to ensure that the programs in which you're using is not intended to be discriminatory. So I'll give you a tip here. I think it's very important as you start to explore this technology and use it in your organizations, just make sure you apply that whole we do not discriminate on the basis of, you know, your EEO. That extends to all of this too, right? And for me, that's enough. Don't sign those pledges. Just say that it extends to the practices and the processes in which you use. And I think that will show the commitment of what you're trying to do if you decide to explore with some of the technology that is out here. And provide information. Don't be shy about it. Don't be shy about telling applicants, telling your employees that this is a tool that we're going to use to help us be more efficient, and this is how it's going to be used. And it also can be used for retention. You know, how many folks do job studies, right? You study a desk, you audit a desk, and kind of see like, oh, does it make sense that we are doing steps in this way? Well, this is another way you can use that. You can literally have AI software built in that kind of follows the employee during the day, right? Follows what they're doing, how they're accessing things. A lot of call centers have started to use that, of how we can respond to individuals quicker, and whether or not, you know, all of us hate pushing all those buttons. I do. I'm like, I just push 0 like 10 times. And I'm like, I just want to talk to a human being. And so I think, though, that's what this is designed to do. It's designed to build in these processes that does get you the answer without having to have that human interaction. But somebody's got to build that, and it's important that you know how your organization is set up to do that. And so, of course, the EEOC also is providing like this, well, what if you feel like my rights are violated, right? And, you know, again, I think it's important to stress to you all to try to have those kind of issues come to you first. So be welcoming, be open about what you're doing, and to make sure that individuals understand that they can reach out for help, reach out for questions, because as I kind of checked, I checked last week as I was preparing for this presentation to kind of see, like, has the EEOC seen an uptick, right, in charges filed as it relates to these issues? And they have. And what's happening is that because they have this guidance on particularly ADA, then what they're seeing is you're seeing an uptick in charges as it relates to the ADA. And so the subset of that is a lot of applicants are filing these charges. And the thing that's frustrating, I'll be honest, is like, did they really want this job anyway? And so it's kind of like, it's just kind of another meal that you have to go through of dealing with some of those issues. So you've heard me say it a few times about talking about what is this Chat GPT and why, that seems to be, that is the leader in the AI right now. Google and other places have tried to start to get like their version of a Chat GPT, but Chat GPT is miles ahead. And it is true, it allows human-like conversation. You can ask it to compose an email, bless you, an essay, or any other doc. And guess what? It's free. It is free. Now that's a problem, right? I'm like, can you charge like 99 cents or something? I'm like, but it is free. And so, everybody and their mother is like using it. And so, of course, there will come some subscriptions. Now, what you're gonna get for the $4.99, I wouldn't buy that. Just use it for free. But it is for free. And so that means that anyone can try it, anybody can check it out. But what I think some of the things that has now kind of got ChatGPT to Congress is that there was this whole story that ran a few months back that talked about that there was a prominent lawyer, Jonathan Turley, who was accused of sexual harassing a student during a class trip to Alaska. And ChatGPT said that this happened. Well, he had never been to Alaska, had never been with a student to Alaska, and it became a whole thing about these false accusations. And so, but then there was no repercussions for ChatGPT for putting out that false information. And so it's almost like you kept going till you messed up, right? Now it is all these things that we now have to deal with, because then what happens is another lawyer, because we can't help ourselves, tried to use it against Turley, and Turley's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't that, that is not me. But he also felt like attack on his character. But then it's like, well, what claims do you have? And ChatGPT kind of has some like small prints of disclaimers as it relates to, like, it's like, rely on this information at your own cost, right? And if you want to do that, and so of course ethics and all of the other things have been brought into that conversation, but many times, like, if you rely upon that to make decisions, you could be firing the wrong person. You could be hiring the wrong person. And so I think that, one thing that I will stress to you is that there has to be that human element that we need in order to make sure that we're not kind of getting ahead of ourselves with this technology. So I've kind of alluded to talking about some of these potential issues with AI. And one thing is that, it definitely can lead to discrimination, bias, sexism. I mean, we've seen some extremes, is that, there was some company that was using it, and it was a performance tool. And in their mind, they had made up that certain individuals who played certain sports seemed to perform better than others. And so a lot of times we take like all of these like personality tests, and they ask these odd questions, and you really don't know like what it's trying to get to. Well, this particular product, it was asking questions about, had you ever played sports? Had you ever, and if you did, like what kind of sports? For some reason or another, this software was weeding out anybody who played lacrosse. Like, first of all, that's just became a sport like recent. And then, I know all of us go to like lacrosse tournaments like 5,000 times at this point because our kids play it, but it's like, when did this become a thing, first of all? And now you have built this into a question that is weeding out individuals somehow related to their job performance. Well, you're gonna have a problem with that. Because, I can sit here and wreck my brain as to why I feel like there's a connection there, but it's not, right? And so I think it's very important for you to understand what that is, because again, it's like, okay, well then are you discriminating against me because of this sport? But then what is my discrimination? Is it linked to something else? If you choose to say, I don't want to hire anybody to play lacrosse, well, lacrosse is not a protected class, but then you start to think about, well, who plays lacrosse? Right? Is it more female than men? Like, how does all that come into play? And that's where you can get into those those things. But then also, what about your programmers, right? There are people who literally, we all have our own biases. I mean, and I will always tell folks that, like, no one goes through life without bias. And so, but you remember, there are people who are developing these programs. So they may have their own bias, and they may be creating your programs, and you don't even know that it's happening, but it's also then weeding out a certain group of people that then becomes a major liability for you. And so I think it's important that you have to ask those right questions, because there is a such thing as unconscious bias that can manifest in these things. And so it results in, you having a disparate impact on a group of people that will then become actionable, right? Because it's not about you using the technology, it's about the results that come with it. So again, make sure that it's related to the job. Look at your specific states and see if there's any limitations as it relates to how in which you use technology, because some states are definitely more ahead of this than others. Illinois is like putting out, for example, some specific guidelines that they are pushing for individuals to have. And then also trying to come up with best practices for how in which you interact with your vendors is also very important, because you have to have a very good rapport for your vendors. I will tell you, you probably shouldn't just Google a vendor. I think, this is a good time to have conversations with others about their own experiences and who they've been working with, and kind of on their brand. That's just telling me what I have to stop talking in a minute. Thank you. Because I get so excited. And so I think that, I've talked about some of these pitfalls that are out there. And, us folks who deal with employment, and especially who deal with individuals and HR, you always feel like, oh, there's always something. Something is out there trying to get us, like the world, right? And so AI is no different in terms of how in which you have to be mindful of that. And think about, too, is that, when we think about the disparate impact that could happen, what you have is that you think about the group of people, take time, look at the data that's coming back, right? If you start to see a certain pattern of individuals that are showing up in, whether it's recruiting, whether it's if you're training folks and the results are all these people don't think the same, right? Really take that time to look at that data, because you may need to do some retooling from your own perspective to make sure that you don't have some of these. Is it going to have an impact on the workforce? Absolutely it is. And it's going to have it, but I think the way you get ahead of this is figure out how it works for you. Figure out how you can tie in AI into the services that you deliver and the products that you deliver. In our own law firm, we have a whole group now that is only focused on AI and how we provide better services to our client using more efficient means. And so you just have to figure that out in order for, again, so you eliminate this fear that I'm gonna lose my job, And I think that before, we went through the wave. Remember when you talked about blue collar, and folks were like, oh, all these machines and all of these things and all of these computers, we still need somebody to push the button. We still need somebody to pull it down and put it in there, right? And so again, it's the same thing, is that while a lot of folks feel like this addresses the white collar employees in terms of the processes and the desk services, but again, it will just enhance it, and we just need to make sure that we're training people so that they also can take advantage of these opportunities, because it can't replace everything. So when we think about what's next, we know that the Federal Trade Commission, this is on the Federal Trade Commission's radar, and they are working to put together some kind of rules and regulations specifically around AI. The White House has provided kind of what is called the AI Bill of Rights. So it tells mostly employees and individuals, hey, this is what they can and cannot do with this information. This is how it can and can be used. And so I encourage you to kind of take a look at that, because you need to know the factors that are being considered in this processing. And remember that outsourcing does not eliminate liability. It does not give you a scapegoat for like, oh, that was the piece of crap. Like, it does not do that. It really puts it back on the employer. And I think that was intentional, because again, they cannot get ahead of all of the activity that is going on in this area. So it's important that you have compliance to the best of your ability, because why? We are in like no rule zone right now. So just, I would apply the same rules and regulations that you have as it relates in the employment space, especially when you're using it with any kind of employment opportunities. And I think that what we want to do, and I'll close with this, is that I think that it's important when we think about the tips that we want to, and as we try to work for our workforce, I think it's very important to do a couple of things. Like, assess your organization. Think about what tools you're already using, right? Think about whether or not they're working for you or they're not. And if they're not, take a moment and do an audit of that and say, you know what, how can we make this better? Or how can we eliminate that? Start to come up with maybe a small team of individuals that's looking at specifically jobs, job descriptions, job responsibilities, and figuring out whether we can do better in terms of our efficiency and our customer delivery of services. Also, think about how in which, if we're going to use this tool, what accommodations do we have ready and accessible and to put in place, right? So if you know you're doing a test or something that requires someone to hear, well, you got to be ready to so that someone who cannot hear can take that test. Or depending on the mechanism you use, and get ahead of that, because you can get very flustered when you're kind of inundated with requests to accommodate, especially on something that is also new. And so I encourage you to kind of take that moment and look at your processes, because your employees are looking at it. Understand that if you have a writing component as part of your application process, they probably took their answer from ChatGPT. And so it may be important for you to ask some follow-up questions, right? And that's easy to do. Like, if they give you this whole story about they went to Paris, just say, like, did you really like the Eiffel Tower? Like, what did you think when you saw it? And if they look at you like you crazy, then you know that they probably made it up. And so there's ways in which you kind of address the concerns that people are having as it relates to, like, you know, folks really providing information that is not really theirs. But it can skew all over the place. So I encourage you to have fun with it. You know, make it part of your organization so you don't run the fears, and really have transparent conversations with folks in your organization about how you plan to use it to the extent that you do, so then you don't have this fear of like, oh, they're trying to take my job away.
Janica, it's exactly 1:30. You finished perfectly on time. And most importantly, yes,